talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is episode number 31. This is the premier podcast to talk about identity and access management. Premier in my own mind, at least. And I'm here with Jim. How you doing, Jim?
Good. I thought you were talking about Adobe Premiere, and then I was going to agree. But yeah, I think we cornered the market on Identity at the Center podcast. Wouldn't you say?
At least from what I know. I don't know how many podcasts there are out there that are specifically focused on IAM. I'm sure there are, but until I hear it differently, I'm just going to call us the premier one. How about that?
There you go.
Ignorance is bliss.
Hopefully we're not throwing out too much ignorance here, though.
Well, we'll let people decide that on their own. So I have to address the elephant in the room. That is that Katie's Chiefs beat my Niners. I know we're recording kind of like a week late, so we're kind of a week behind the times, but it was disappointing to watch the Niners lose, especially considering what I thought was very bad play calling in the fourth quarter. But I guess if I'm going to lose, I don't necessarily mind losing to Mahomes and Reed. What'd you think of the game?
I thought it was an entertaining game. I thought the halftime show was phenomenal. And I feel that I really need to pat myself on the back publicly for kind of calling that Mahomes comeback and the engineered comeback. I think that the play calling on the San Fran side certainly helped matters, but I mean, you got to give it to Mahomes and Reed, I guess, to an extent. But like, that guy is just a magician. And if you're going to lose to somebody, at least it's kind of like losing to Tom Brady, because he did it so many times where, the last 2 minutes of the game, if you give him the ball, you almost expect to lose.
Yeah, I don't think Mahomes is polarizing though as Brady. So I don't necessarily. I think he's a more likable character across the NFL versus, if you're in Boston, you love Brady. If you're not in Boston, then it's 50-50 whether you love or hate him. So
True.
I think Mahomes is kind of like the face of the league now, but he didn't have a particularly great game. I don't think he deserved the MVP. I think it should have gone to the running back. But whatever, that's the past. It is what it is.
It's not that distant of the past, Jeff. It's actually the current Super Bowl champion is the Chiefs, and the runner-up is the Niners.
Yeah, but it's over. Season's over. Who knows? People could be listening to this, and they could be listening to it 5 years from now and be like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So what do you want to talk about today?
I would like to talk about the biggest challenges in customer IAM or CIAM. And
so I've heard it called CIAM too as well, right?
CIAM.
CIAM.
Yeah.
I mean, SIM is kind of like security event monitoring, but I've heard CIAM, I've heard CIAM. I don't necessarily care for either one. I think it's just customer or consumer IAM.
I think that people who are in the know like to confuse people who are not in the know by coming up with fancy things to call things. And basically what we're talking about here is IAM focused on external user populations. They could be customers, they could be partners, they could be the public, students, things like that. Any kind of population which is external, I think, falls into this CIAM or CIAM space. And kind of what I want to talk about in terms of the biggest challenges is, I think when we talk about CIAM, the mind goes to authentication. And I think a lot of the solutions that say, yes, we help address this space are focused on just the AM part of IAM, access management. But, it's identity and access management, or identity management and access management. I've been saying this like my whole career because I've really been focused on external IAM or CIAM. And so when we talk about the identity part, it's kind of, that's the tricky stuff. That's the part that is hard to find solutions for. So if you were thinking, okay, well, what do you mean? What is the identity management in CIAM? It's things like registration, administration of IDs, and delegated administration. So delegated administration is very common in B2B use cases. A lot of times, so if I set up a shop and I was doing, paper processing, I might have a customer like Bank of America, and from Bank of America who's using my paper processing services, I may set up one or two people as the administrator, and the rest of the folks that work there who go to my website or websites are would have their accounts managed by those couple of administrators at Bank of America, rather than me having to centrally manage those IDs, set up new IDs when they get new employees, things like that. I'd let Bank of America do it themselves. And when you get into kind of some of those scenarios, it can get very complex in terms of one company, my paper processing company, might have a very different way that they want to do it than another organization wants to handle kind of a very similar type of similar type of use case.
Yeah, I've been involved with this on the operations side, and I don't know if necessarily organizations are typically set up to be in a position where they can set someone up as a delegate, at least not for all applications. I think like Active Directory, right? There's tools you can get by default. If you want to make someone an AD account, you typically have to have some sort of administrator rights within your domain. I don't know if you give that necessarily directly to a customer or a partner to create their own accounts. And that I'm just using that as an example because I can think of other applications where you may not want to give up those rights. And then how would you support something like that? You could maybe use something like an IAM tool to provide those granular permissions to be able to only operate on accounts that are associated with your work and things like that. And I think that kind of speaks to the challenge that customer or consumer IAM brings. Is it can be a many to one or a one to a many relationship that is challenging to try and solve for sometimes.
Right. Well, you think about a very large organization, a large global organization where you've got hundreds of thousands of employees, maybe some kind of retail operation or food services that's not franchised. Now, you might want to delegate the administration to the stores, or even if you're talking about a large global corporation where you have IT staffs or departments that want to manage their own AD accounts, you can't very well just say, all right, you need to install Active Directory users and computers and figure out how to do it there. You have to make it some kind of web-based application. Now, I think on the internal side, you can say, what are the solutions out there we're going to fit into whatever is available that solves our use case? When you're talking about your customers, though, you have to have something that is user-friendly and kind of matches with how you want to conduct business. And so that's where I think that the challenge becomes even greater on the external side, is that you really can't just homogenize things and just dump it out there on the internet. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of some of the things I've run into where it's like, why is this so different from place to place, and why it really comes down to, why aren't there products that kind of can solve this, right? Why can't I just go out there and grab a product and do delegated administration, or all of let me put it this way. So a lot of our clients that we work with on these problems will start to lay out, here are all my use cases, and where we end up is like there's not a product that I'm aware of that does all of these things, right? So right. You're going to have some level of custom development. One of the examples was an organization that did something they called authorization codes. So they did testing for students, and you could sign up for these tests and take these tests for free if you had a code. And so they didn't even know who the students were yet, right? These are people who had not signed up for the test or anything like that, but through their university, they would get their codes. So this organization would create a batch of, say, 50 codes. They would be provided to a professor, some administrator at the university, and that person would dish out the codes to the people who were supposed to get them. Now, those students would then go onto this organization's website. If they already had a profile, they would log in and provide this authorization code. If they did not have a login, they'd have to register and then provide the authorization code. And actually, the authorization code, I think, was a a token within a URL. So basically, if they click that link, it would bring them to a web page. It would identify that they had an authorization code. It would be buried within the URL, and then they would either log in or go through a registration. But that was like very specific to kind of that use case scenario. To me, it was like that's a genius way to go ahead and solve that. But I don't think it's been homogenized for the larger population of CIAM customers. Also worked for an organization that had a large dealer network, and they just had a hierarchical structure within their dealer network that you could have a very large dealership, say on the West Coast, and they had a parent organization, and then they had regional organizations, and then they had local stores, and they had to be able to set up administration at any of those levels. And then other parts of the country, they might just have a single store or a group of 3 or 4 stores with one parent organization. And that's like, okay, well, that's great that you guys handle administration like that, but is that the way most companies do it? The answer is no. And so that's where it becomes challenging. And you need to kind of have a development framework to be able to work within that. And some of it, there are some solutions out there that can be built around. So I've worked with ForgeRock's Open Identity Manager at one point, and it did have some workflow capabilities and some ability that it could kind of model that type of solution, but it wasn't without its cost. There was a lot of customization that needed to be done in order to get that type of scenario to work. And so I think a lot of our clients are hoping that they can just go out and get a cloud-based solution and kind of model all their use cases within that cloud-based solution is just going to work. And, compared to something like human resources or some kind of internal or, accounting or CRM where they're willing to kind of adapt their business processes into what's available. Identity management, customer identity management isn't really as far along. Okay. Yeah. So that was kind of that about some examples of what makes it difficult. Anything that you could think of?
Not offhand, at least. I mean, I think you covered everything that I can think of. I'll just add, I can think to the enrollment and the registration part. That's typically the area where most customers drop out if you make it too hard to use the product or service that you're trying to get people into. So anything that's done to increase that or make that easier, I should say, is typically a big benefit to the organization. I think that's why you see a lot of organizations using things like social logins, right? LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, even Apple's got their own version of it now. You make it easy for the individual to register and take away some of that burden as well from a account management standpoint, and even some of the security. If you look at it from like how Google manages their own accounts from a security perspective, and allow that trust to exist.
Right. Yeah, registration is a use case that usually is a little bit less complex. Some organizations have some checkpoints along the way that make it a little more complex, make it a little more custom. But registration is something usually you can leverage within the package that you're selecting. And if you need to integrate it with more complex workflows, it can be done through APIs. But a lot of times what organizations end up doing is, keeping their homegrown or home built identity management solution if they have one, because it's like there's no product that can easily replace what they've already built over the course of many years in terms of those custom workflows.
Do you think there's a specific area of access management technologies in the CIAM space that they don't do well? Because I can think of something like delegate administration not being handled really well in technologies today without some degree of customization. Do you agree with that, or do you think there's something else? Do you think that products like Okta, Ping, Microsoft, Covisint, right, all these other kind of CIM technologies don't do well at?
You mean from an access management side that they don't do well at, or?
Yeah, I think either that, or either from the authentication or registration, or even just administration of accounts from a central or a delegated perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on the money, though, that the delegate administration is probably the hardest thing to solve. And it's the thing that the fewest of those vendors you mentioned, and there are other vendors as well. I mean, SAP, Gigia was and is a very popular solution for CIAM. And I think, it doesn't do a very good job when it comes to delegated administration. But, in terms of, so CIM is often called either customer or consumer IAM. And so consumer implies is more focused on kind of a retail environment. And, there's a smaller set of identity management workflows. There's registration, there's some kind of basic profile management, things like that. But that the bulk of the use cases are around authentication, bulk of the complexity. And I think if you're in that space and you don't have a lot of complexity, it's not as difficult to kind of fit into a product and leverage that framework. It's when you get into these seriously complex, especially B2B type customer, B2B customer use cases, that's where it can get really hairy and really custom. On the AM side, access management, so authentication, authorization, that's a space that's, evolving very rapidly. The integration landscape has, I think in the past decade has really changed a lot. So like I said, this has kind of been my area of focus since I got into IAM 15, 16 years ago. And at the time, we had a lot of legacy web applications that were custom built. We were looking for a way to integrate them into an access management solution. And the primary ways that was being done was either through web server filters, so you'd install some software on your web server, or you set up a reverse proxy. And both of those systems kind of mimic the way a login screen would operate within your environment and would use host headers within the application. So essentially would authenticate a person, give them a cookie, redirect them back to the application that they were trying to get to. And within that redirect, they would create a host header for the application, just like their existing login screen would do. So you'd have very minimal re-engineering of the application. Now, a third integration opportunity was to use the API of the access management system, but that was only if you were either starting a new application or you're willing to re-engineer. Nowadays, almost all the access management tools are encouraging strongly people to use open standards like SAML, OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, and there still is some legacy support out there because I think one of the things is that if you're to try to replace like an old CA SiteMinder environment, you would have hundreds of applications that are integrated using SiteMinder agents. And so it's a tough sale to go into an environment and say, we want you to rip out your old SiteMinder product, put ours in, and you're going to have to re-engineer 250 applications you're going to have to make the SAML enable all those applications. That's a lot of work. And some organizations are making that move because they realize that they need to, that, depending on a proprietary agent is going to continue to hamstring them. But another option is to basically, so the option is that they would then have to re-engineer those applications. And again, that's a lot of work. So some organizations or some products are having basically having backward support and having filters and having reverse proxies. But obviously, that's for that legacy use case.
They probably draw a line in the sand too there, right? Say, okay, going forward, we're going to use OIDC, and we'll continue to support maybe the older stuff and let things die naturally. That might be a easier to take change. I've seen that as well.
I think as a practitioner, as a program manager, that's what we want to do. I think as from a product side, if they can sell the product, they're going to encourage best practices, but they're not going to demand that the customer comply with that. Obviously, right? They have the capability to support backward. They're not going to force the customer down that track. But the longer that they continue to depend on proprietary agents and things like that, to just continuing that problem.
Yeah, I just like to see organizations, again, having that split where, okay, well, we know we have SiteMinder, and using your example, and we're going to have to keep that for another 5 years because it doesn't make sense to rewrite an application that might be converting to another platform anyway. So they just kind of let those apps die on the vine. And then at some point, okay, we're done with kind of the old way. And any new apps that have come up during those 5 years of transition, they've pushed to the new method anyway. So they kind of grow out of it, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly why people look at like a portfolio of, say, 250 applications that are running on proprietary agents, and they're thinking like, okay, I might be willing to rewrite or re-engineer a few of them that I don't see replacing. But, let's just say they were written on Lotus Domino and they're sitting around and they are, just barely continuing to exist. But we don't want to rewrite them because we got a quote, and to rewrite 100 of them was going to be $3 million. We'd rather just run them until we don't need them anymore.
Right.
So a couple other things. One is that, so I talked about this shift toward open standards, and I mentioned OpenID Connect and OAuth2, and I also mentioned SAML. And so what I'm seeing more and more is that SAML is being relegated to, more on the internal side. So if you're connecting to a SaaS application and that is the methodology they support, sure, SAML is a good choice. But if you have more control, if you have a choice between SAML or OpenID Connect, you should choose OpenID Connect. And that's just because it's a more modern standard. It was designed to fill in kind of some of the gaps that SAML left around. And so that we're seeing a shift there. Also, I think we've talked about this a few times on the podcast, which is that the new paradigm is that it's MFA everywhere. Everything should have MFA. It shouldn't be, especially on an internet-facing application, relying on password only. This is tough for some user populations, right? You don't have the level of engagement or level of, level of engagement is probably the right term, to force somebody down the path of using MFA. I personally, every time I'm given an option to use MFA, I take it, almost all inclusively, because I just feel like, I don't want to rely on passwords. But I guess most people probably look at it as more of a hassle than a benefit. So you're seeing that shift is taking place, but you're also seeing that, in certain parts of this sector, the MFA capabilities are becoming much stronger in terms of, at least as an option. And so there are vendors who specialize in MFA, especially around using biometrics, using MFA for mobile applications. What are some of you've seen a lot of these demonstrations too, Jeff. So what are some of the MFA options that you've been seeing lately that you think are worth talking about?
Well, I think it's going to be a while before things change over. I think people are pretty ingrained with SMS, even though it's not the best way, it's still better than nothing. the push notification and then the apps that are out there. I'm looking at my phone and I have 4 different push notification apps for for different services that I use MFA on. And there's some that can kind of consolidate some of those things. So you've got things like Authy, which can support multiple applications. LastPass has their own take on it. I think Google's supports multiple services as well. So I think it sometimes is a little bit of a messy place, but in my mind, it's the easiest. For my use case, if I want to log into something, I'm on my iOS and Mac OS devices, I can get the prompt and easily approve it from my Apple Watch and kind of move forward from there. There's also other ones that take advantage of things like typing cadence, right? I'm thinking of a company called Typing DNA, I think is one, where the way you type is your biometric signature, which I think is very interesting. Now you have to develop that signature, and I think it needs still some tuning to make sure that it meets the needs, but could be another way to approach it. And then you've got the obvious ones like fingerprint and voice and retina or facial recognition, those sorts of things. So I think it's interesting how MFA is going to continue to evolve. I think people have kind of settled on that your phone is your second thing, and you need to authenticate to that phone to do something. We'll see how that works in the future. I mean, you also got physical devices, smart cards and YubiKeys and different types of USB type security keys, which I think are great and they're definitely secure, but boy, are they a pain to manage logistically if you're an organization. I still have nightmares about distributing RSA keys back in the day to the organization and them getting lost and dog ate it. I ran over it. I mean, all the different things that can happen, and then trying to work through that. So I'm not necessarily as much of a fan of physical keys unless there is a way to distribute the logistics part of it. And I actually just read the other day that I think YubiKey now has a service that organizations can take advantage of where they will handle the logistics and fulfillment of keys, which might be interesting. I don't know what it costs or if it makes sense for an organization, but certainly solves some of the pain around an operations team having to manage, boxes full of RSA keys, for example, and putting them on the server and with the seed file and all the junk that goes with it.
Yeah, it seems to me like if a company like that could partner up with Microsoft and or Google, that it seems like it would be just a matter of, hey, we're using this major identity provider. They provide that as a service. Let's include that at least for our privileged accounts.
Yeah, I think YubiKey's done a pretty good job of kind of pushing the security key forward. I kind of saw that, and I have one, and I don't use it as much because I have my phone and everything's kind of shipped to that, so it's for me that's more convenient. But they certainly have opened up their services quite a bit, and I think Google partners with them on their Google Authenticator, but don't quote me on that.
Right. So the last thing I wanted to just mention on the AM side is, I think that at least most of the clients I'm working with, they want to start by looking at cloud-based solutions. What that means, we've kind of debated over and over. But in the AM space, it's much more of a multi-tenant approach than what you see on, say, IGA. Most, I think, AM solutions are multi-tenant. And I think that really where that space is going is around a higher availability, higher leverage of AI and machine learning to kind of detect compromised or fraudulent type of transactions. So compromised accounts or potentially an account that is acting out of the norm where maybe it should be required to do a step-up challenge or potentially just being disabled and have some administrator from the company go back in and re-enable that account. And that I think that's pretty much game changing. And I think, if you were to implement some kind of on-premise AM solution at this point, that's potentially what you are giving up, is the ability to, have those cloud scale AI solutions, a year or two down the road. I think they're starting to surface at some level, but this is an area that I think most of the vendors are looking at as like, this is how we can potentially differentiate at a security level.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's not like you're gonna establish your own AI and machine learning in-house processes. I think
No,
there's
that's
plenty of
exactly
services
it.
around that.
Exactly. Kind of some things that are on the horizon. I know we want to wrap up here, but you know, I think as organizations are shifting to the cloud and leveraging cloud infrastructure, so like AWS or Microsoft Azure, many organizations are already there. Many organizations are using DevOps tools for automation. And I think a lot of IAM practitioners are kind of being left behind because, from an infrastructure standpoint, you're seeing a much higher utilization of Docker and deployment of containers rather than traditional servers. They're using robots to deploy software, and there's identities in all these tools that are being used to authenticate as they go through the process. How are those identities being managed? And it's a new frontier for a lot of practitioners. That, first off, you just have to know how those tools operate. And as I've been a big advocate of in the past, get on YouTube, understand how Docker works, understand how Chef and Puppet work, especially if those are the tools that are used in your organization. If they're not, look for specific tools that your organization is working with, but understand the DevOps space. And then I think the other thing is, this is something I harp on a lot, which is that if you're looking at CIAM solutions today, I think what you need to do is think in terms of we're selecting a platform, and we want to have a platform that we can grow into. So maybe our first phase is going to be to replace kind of the legacy SSO system. And then we start looking at, okay, some MFA, policy management, password management, and kind of the basic blocking and tackling stuff. But what I would strongly encourage is think beyond the next year or two and start thinking about where you want to be enabled. What is the what are the when you're looking at different platforms, what are the ones that you say these guys are ahead of the curve? These are the ones where they're going to push me into bigger and better opportunities. And so I really think that when you're looking at platforms, or when you're looking at solutions, think about it as kind of a platform that you can grow into.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to have conversations with the business to know where is the organization going, so you can plan for that as well. So it behooves you to make friends on the business side so that you can plan accordingly. And at the same time, on the business side, make sure that you're working with your IAM folks to keep them updated on where things are going strategically so that they can be ready for you.
Right. And I think it also, those are challenges you should put to the vendor. Where are you guys as a company going? How much are you investing in R&D? What's the next wave of technology that's going to be available? And I'm not just looking for what's your roadmap for the next 6 to 12 months, but kind of strategically, where are you taking the company? And I think being able to evaluate those responses is going to be a big part. Also, I think reading analyst papers and understanding, where do the analysts see these various vendors in terms of how much are they investing in their platforms.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Anything else that you want to talk about from the CIM or CIAM space?
That was a mouthful, so I think we've hit it pretty good, and I think even as we were talking about it, I was thinking we should break a few of these topics off and make them standalone podcasts at some point. What you talked about with the YubiKey. I was also thinking about the FIDO Alliance, and just maybe some opportunities to bring some folks from outside of just me and you to kind of talk about things they're working on, projects they're working on that solve some of these topics.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're that's the wonderful world of IAM, right? There's always something out there that we could talk about. And because things change, just because it's the way it is today, right? 2020, 2021 might be a totally different story. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. And Jeff, just one thought, like if anyone's listening to this podcast and is still listening, and you've got some ideas on topics you'd like to either hear us talk about or try to get some guests on to talk about, contact us. We're at identityatthecenter.com, and there's some kind of widget there that you can leave us feedback.
Mm-hmm. There's also the email address, which is questions@identityatthecenter.com. That's another avenue too. But yeah, there's definitely a variety of ways that you can get a hold of us and give us your feedback. So I think that that's a good spot to leave it. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next one. You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.